am the clown with the tearaway face. Here in a flash and gone without a trace.
I had to wait 300 years for a virgin to light a candle. Hello everyone and welcome to day 16 of Terrorthon. Today we're going to be covering Salem, which you've almost certainly heard of, especially if you watched the 13th video where we touched upon the Salem witch trials. Salem is still a real place in existence today, and it's got a notorious name, and when people think witches and horror more loosely, especially with the likes of Salem's Lot, they think of Salem. So I thought we'd discuss it a little bit. So we're going to be retreading old ground to an extent, discussing the Salem witch trials in a bit more detail and the history of the town today. So prior to the European colonization of the Americas, Salem was known as Naum Keag, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, at the time of contact in the early 1600s. And many of the Naum Keag tribe died in the war with the Terrorthon tribe, and there was a smallpox epidemic from 1617 to 1619, which pretty much cleared out Naum Keag. In 1626, colonists would settle at Naum Keag, and then, June 29th, 1629, the town was renamed Salem, named for the word shalom, or peace. And then in 1633 there was a second smallpox epidemic, so more Native Americans were driven out. And then in 1686, the Native American heirs to the land of Salem were paid 20 English pounds. And that was it. The land now belonged to the English Puritans who'd flooded over. But what about the famous witch trials, I hear you ask? Well, in 1668, a man named Joseph Glanville wrote against modern Sadducism, and he said that to deny witches and apparitions would also mean that you were denying God, angels and demons, and when Puritans were flooded all over the place, this was not a good idea if you wanted to stay alive. In Salem, there were violent feuds between families, particularly between the Putnam and the Porter families, and historians today believe this to be the potential start of witch trials, people trying to eliminate their enemies by accusing them of being witches. But shit got real when two girls known as Abigail Williams and Betty Paris and their friends played with a Venus glaze and egg to learn in advance what trades their future sweethearts should have. And shortly after this, the girls began to have fits which were considered at the time beyond epileptic, and they constantly complained of being pinched and pricked with pins. However, doctors could find no physical evidence of any ailment. In later years it was proposed that they were suffering from convulsive ergo poisoning, and these factors were considered to be the catalysts for the witch trials. A man who was known as Judge John Haythorne came to prominence around this time when witchcraft was considered a serious felony, and he became one of the more famous witch trial judges. His nickname would later be the Hanging Judge for when he was sentencing witches. The Puritan belief was that women were inherently more sinful and more susceptible to damnation, so they were targeted much more. However, as I said in day 13, some witches who confessed were reintegrated into society after being jailed for a while. They weren't all burned at the stake. However, there was one case that was very disturbing. A mentally ill woman who murdered her daughter was hanged because at that time there was no distinction between insanity and criminal behaviour. From the witch trials, 30 people were found guilty, 14 women and 5 men died by hanging, and one man who refused to enter a guilty or innocent plea was pressed to death, and at least 5 of these suspected witches died in jail. The last trial was held in May 1693, and that was the end of the Salem witch trials, and the story is now considered to be part of the formation of American history, with the theocracy being completely shattered after this. And that is essentially the end of the story of the Salem witch trials. Today, the town is still bustling with tourism of people wanting to come visit because of these morbid tales, and the townspeople are sort of 50-50 on it. One half think they should sort of cash in on their notoriety, whereas the other half are sort of ashamed of what happened and wish to have more respect for the victims. So if you do happen to visit Salem out of a morbid curiosity, just please be respectful. There have been so many pieces of media formed on Salem. You got Salem's Lot, Hocus Pocus, Lord of Salem, and that's just movies. There are countless more books out there about the subject, and I recommend looking into it if you're interested. And so ends the tale of Salem, one of the most notorious places in real life horror history. See you tomorrow.